My name is Frances Ashby. 3 weeks after I buried my husband, the family solicitor sat in my own morning room, drank my tea, and slid a paper across the table that said I was not sound enough to keep the roof it was written under. He used my own cup. He set his hat on my own sideboard. And he asked me to sign away the ground my husband is buried in, as though he were doing me a kindness. A widow can't hold land, he told me. He did not lower his voice. My late husband's sister stood in the doorway. 2 of our tenants stood behind her, come in from the wet to pay their Michaelmas rent. 4 people heard him name me a fool before the tea had gone cold in the pot. He thought the grief had made me small. He had forgotten a plain thing. I had copied out my husband's ledgers for 19 years. I knew my husband's hand. And I knew his hand too, better than he knew it himself. So the next morning, before the house was awake, I took the lamp down to the estate room. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I go on, do one small thing for me. Subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Frances travels tonight. Now, let me take you back and tell it plain from the start. The house is called Thornholt. It sits in the North Riding of Yorkshire, at the elbow of a beck that never quite floods and never quite runs dry. It is not a great estate. It is a good one. Some 800 acres of it, near enough, in good heart, with 11 tenant farms and an orchard my husband's grandfather planted, and a stone house that has stood since before anyone thought to write the year on it. The year I mean is 1868. That is when this happened. I want you to hold the place in your mind, because a great deal of this story is about ground, and who may stand upon it, and who may not. I married into Thornholt in the spring of 1849. I was 33 then, which the county thought late. My husband was Edmund Ashby, and he was a quiet man, and a fair one, and he had a head for kindness, but not for figures. That is not a small thing to say of a landed man. A landed man who cannot keep his own accounts is a man at the mercy of anyone who can. Edmund knew it. It is the reason I think that he married me, though he was too tender ever to say so plainly. I could add a column, I could read a lease. I had kept my own father's shop books from the age of 14, and my father was a draper in Thirsk, and a draper's books are not forgiving. So from the first month of my marriage, I kept the books of Thornholt, not as a wife dabbling. As the keeper, every ledger, every rent day, every tithe paid to the parish, and every seed bill, and every farrier's charge, and every pound laid out on the roof and the drains and the new buyer in the wet year of 52. 19 years of it. I could tell you, tonight, without opening a page, what Hepworth of the Low Farm owed at Lady Day in any year you cared to name. I never wanted thanks for it. It was simply the work, and the work was mine, and I loved the house it kept whole. I want you to understand that, because a man is going to tell you I was unfit. He is going to say grief had unsettled my mind. And I need you to know, before he says it, whose hand paid the wages that kept that man in his own good coat. There is a paper I must tell you about now, though at the time I hardly thought of it once a year. When Edmund and I were married, his father was still living, and his father was a careful old man. He had our marriage settlement drawn up. It was signed in 1849, before ever this solicitor of ours was breached, near enough. And that settlement did a thing that was not common, but was not rare either, among people who had watched land slip through soft hands. It vested Thornholt in me, to my sole and separate use, free of any heir's claim, free of any husband's debt, free and clear to be mine while I lived. Edmund held it in his lifetime as its master, and I never once thought of it as anything but ours together. But the paper said the land was mine, not mine to share. Mine, the old man had seen something in me at the table, I think that first winter. He never said what, he only had it written so. That paper lived in the estate room, in a japanned box on the second shelf, black lacquer, a little chipped at one corner, with a brass clasp gone dull. I dusted it the way you dust a thing you never open. I could not have told you the last time I lifted the lid. It sat there through 19 harvests, and I paid it about as much mind as I paid the box that held the old estate seals. It was only paper. I thought I had no need of it. That is the part I am ashamed of, and I will not hide it from you. I did not read the thing that protected me until a man had already tried to take it. Edmund took ill in the autumn of '67. It was his chest, and it was slow, and it was cruel in the way slow things are. I nursed him through the winter. I will not dwell there. I will only say that I was in that room every night of it, and that I signed nothing and neglected nothing, and that the rents came in on the day and the accounts balanced to the penny even in the week he died, because that is who I am, and grief did not change it. He died in the first week of March, with the beck loud outside and my hand in his. I buried him in the churchyard at Thornholt beside his father, and I came home to a cold house and a full ledger, and I meant to go on. Now I must bring in the man. His name is Josiah Crane. He was our family solicitor of the firm at Northallerton, and he had held our business some 11 years by then. He had taken it over from old Mr. Dunning when Dunning retired, and Edmund had kept him on more out of habit than fondness. Crane was perhaps 48. A neat man, a smooth man. He wore a good black coat, and he kept his nails clean, and he had a way of smiling that never once reached his eyes, though it took me a shameful long while to see that. He was clever. I will grant him that to the end. He was clever, and he was hungry, and he had spent 11 years in and out of the good houses of the North Riding carrying other men's deeds, and I think it had made something turn sour in him. He wanted to be a landed man himself. He wanted to stop carrying the deeds and start holding them. And a widow, alone, with 800 acres and no son, must have looked to him like a door left standing open. He came to the house 11 days after the funeral. He came without asking. That is the first thing I should have marked. He came in a hired gig with a leather case, and he was shown into the morning room, and I gave him tea because you give a man tea, and he sat where my husband used to sit, and he was very sorry for my loss. Then he opened the case. He told me there were matters that could not wait. He was gentle about it, which is the cruelest way. He said the estate was in an awkward posture. He said that with poor Edmund gone, the question of the land must be settled, and that I must not trouble my head over the particulars, for that was what he was for. And then he said the thing that I did not, at first, even understand. He said the marriage settlement was informal. I asked him what he meant by informal. He said it had been drawn up long ago, by the old gentleman's man, in a manner the courts no longer looked kindly on. He said a widow's tenure of such land, on such a paper, could not stand at law. Those were his words. Cannot stand at law. He said it the way a doctor names a thing you cannot argue with because you have not his learning. And then he drew out a document of his own, a petition, he called it, a petition to the county court. He laid it on the table and turned it so I might see, though he did not let go of it. I saw enough. It was a petition setting out that I, Frances Ashby, widow, was by reason of my bereavement no longer competent to the management of my affairs, and praying that the court appoint a fit person to have the ordering of the estate. He had left a line at the foot for my signature. He said it would spare me the trouble. I sat very still. I have found that stillness unsettles a certain kind of man more than tears, and I have never been a weeping woman in any case. I asked him who the fit person was to be. He smiled his smile that stopped at the cheek. He said that need not concern me yet. He said such things arranged themselves. He said I might be perfectly comfortable, kept in the house, provided for with never a worry over a figure again, kept in the house, as though it were his to keep me in. I told him I would not sign that day. I told him I never signed anything the day it was put before me, which was true, and had kept the estate out of trouble for 19 years. He did not like it. But he could hardly force a pen into my hand, and there were servants in the passage, and so he closed his case and said he would return when I had had time to see the sense of it. He said grief clouded the judgment. He said it as a fact of physic, and he looked at me a moment too long when he said it, weighing me, and I understood, though not yet fully, that the clouded judgment was not going to be a thing he was sorry to find. It was going to be a thing he meant to use. That night I did a plain thing. I sat at the little writing desk in the parlour and I wrote him a letter. I have it still. I keep the copy. I wrote that I thanked him for his attention to the estate. I wrote that the land was mine by the settlement of 1849 to my sole and separate use, and that I understood it to be sound. I wrote that I would not sign the petition, then or later, and that I would thank him to proceed with the ordinary business of the estate and nothing further. I was plain, and I was civil, and I signed it in my own firm hand, and I sent it by the carrier the next morning. Mark that. I warned him, in writing, before ever this went further. I put it on paper that I knew my rights and would not yield them. A great deal turns, later, on the fact that I told him plainly and he chose not to hear. He did not answer the letter. He came instead. It was a fortnight on, a grey, wet day near the end of March. He came again in the gig, and this time he did not come alone, though the second man stayed outside. He came with more papers, and he came, I could see at once, in a harder temper, for the letter had told him I was not the soft thing he had reckoned on, and a man like Crane does not enjoy being told. He had two things in his case that day. I will tell you both, because both matter. The first was a physician's line. A written opinion, on a doctor's paper, from a Dr. Nangle of Northallerton, whom I had never met in my life, and who had never once been under my roof, nor felt my pulse, nor asked me the day of the week. And this Dr. Nangle's paper said that the widow Ashby was, in his professional view, of unsettled mind since her bereavement, subject to melancholy and to fixed and unreasonable notions, and not to be relied upon in matters of property. A man I had never met had written down that I was mad, for a fee, and Crane laid it on my table like a trump card. The second thing was an offer. He had, he said, out of pure regard for my situation, found a purchaser for Thornholt, a gentleman who would take the whole of it off my hands and relieve me of every burden. The price named was £900. I want you to sit with that number, because I have sat with it. Thornholt, land and house and 11 farms and the orchard and the standing timber, was worth near £8,000. Any man in the riding with an eye could have told you so. He offered me £900. £900 for a thing worth 8,000, and he called it a kindness to a woman who could not manage. He did not even trouble to make the theft look less than it was. That is how sure he had grown. He thought the doctor's paper had already unlocked the door, and he was simply walking in. And here is the thing he had not weighed. He did not name the purchaser. But I had spent 11 years watching that man's face across a table, and I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that the gentleman who would take Thornholt off my hands was Josiah Crane. He meant to buy it himself, at a ruin's price, through some other man's name, and sit in my husband's house as its master. The solicitor meant to become the squire. On my grief. For £900. There was a witness in the room that day, and I must bring her in now, for she matters greatly before we are done. My husband's sister. Margaret Ashby, that was, married to a Mr. Verrell, who had died some years before and left her very little, so that she had come back to the neighbourhood to be near her brother, and lived in a small way in a cottage on the edge of the estate, on an annuity that Thornholt paid her. £60 a year. It was written into the old arrangements, £60 a year out of the rents I kept, for Edmund's sister, for her life. Margaret was a good enough woman, but a frightened one. She had known want, and want teaches a person to reckon which way the wind sets, and to lean into it, and when Crane came, he had been careful, I saw later, to sit with Margaret first, to tell her that the estate was in danger from my mismanagement, to hint that her £60 a year would be safer in his ordering than in the hands of a widow whose mind was going. He had frightened her onto his side. And so she was there that grey day, in the corner, twisting her gloves, believing, I think, that she was helping to save the family from a madwoman. Crane wanted her there as a witness. He wanted her to see me refuse a generous offer, so that later she could say the widow was unreasonable, just as the doctor's paper said. He was building a picture, you see, papering the walls of it before he ever brought me to court. So I gave them their scene, but not the one he wanted. I did not weep, and I did not rage. I asked him, quietly, whether the purchaser he named would put his own name to the offer, or whether it must be carried by another. He did not answer that. His jaw moved a little. I asked whether Dr. Nangle would swear his opinion before a magistrate, having never examined me, or whether the paper was all the swearing he cared to do. That reached him. And then I turned to Margaret, and I spoke so she would remember every word, and I said, before both of them, that Thornholt was mine by the settlement of 1849, to my sole use, and that I would not sell it for £900, nor for 9,000, and that any paper saying I was unfit to hold it was false, and that I would say the same in any court in England. I said it calm. I said it once, and I sent for Thomas Peel. Thomas Peel was our land steward, and had been since before I came to Thornholt. He was past 70 by then, bent as a shepherd's crook, with hands like old roots, and he had walked every foot of that estate 10,000 times, and he had loved my husband's father, and my husband, and, I will say it, me, in the plain unspoken way of a man who shows love by never once being absent when he is wanted. I sent the girl for him, and he came in from the yard with the wet on his shoulders, and I made him stand in the room while I said again, before him now as well, that the land was mine, and that I would not sign and would not sell, and that Mr. Crane had offered me £900 for a thing worth 8,000 and called it charity. I watched Crane's face while I said it before the steward, and I saw for the first time something behind the smooth of it that was not smooth at all. He had wanted witnesses to my refusal. He had not reckoned on my making witnesses of my own. Thomas Peel stood there dripping and said nothing, but his old eyes went from Crane to the papers to me, and I knew he had understood it whole. 2 warnings now. The letter and this. Twice, before witnesses, I had told that man the truth of it, and told him I would not yield. Twice he chose to go on. He gathered his papers. He was cold now, all the sorrow gone out of his manner. At the door he turned, and he said that I would find the law was not sentimental, and that a woman alone would do well to take the help that was offered before it was withdrawn. And he was gone into the wet, and the gig went off down the Beck Road, and Margaret sat twisting her gloves in the corner and would not meet my eye. I did not sleep well that fortnight. I will be honest with you. There were nights I lay and thought that a doctor's paper and a solicitor's tongue might be worth more, in a court, than a widow's plain word, however true. I thought of what it would be to be declared unfit, to be kept in a room in my own house, while another man ordered the rents I had kept for 19 years. It is a particular kind of fear, that to know you are right, and to be afraid that being right will not be enough. If you have ever felt it, in any matter of your own life, you know the taste of it, and you will understand what came next. Because a thing happened at the quarter-day that decided me. And I want to tell it slowly, for it is the hinge of the whole story, and it is the last cruelty he did me before I stopped being a woman things were done to. Michaelmas quarter-day. The 29th of September, when the half-year's rents fall due and the tenants come up to the house to pay, and by long custom at Thornholt there is a gathering of it, in the great flagged room off the hall, with the steward's table and the rent book, and a barrel broached for the men, and it is a day of the estate the way Christmas is a day of the church. Every tenant comes. And that year, because word had gone about that the master was dead, and the estate unsettled, a few others came who had no rent to pay. Two neighbouring gentlemen, Mr. Fenwick of Barforth and Sir Harry Loft, come to see, I suppose, which way Thornholt would fall, for a falling estate is meat to its neighbours. The room was full, 20 tenants and their eldest sons, the two gentlemen, Margaret, Thomas Peel at his table with the book, and me, at the head of it, in my black, doing what I had done for 19 years, which was to see the rents of Thornholt brought fairly in. Crane came uninvited. He came into the middle of it, when the room was fullest, with his leather case, and he did not wait to be asked. He walked to the steward's table, and he set down his case, and he took out a paper, and he asked the room, in a carrying voice, for its attention on a matter touching the estate. I could have stopped him. I have asked myself since why I did not. I think I did not believe, even then, that he would do the thing he did. I thought there were limits a man kept to, in a full room, before the gentry. I was wrong about the limits. He had none. He read the petition aloud. He read it out to the whole room. He read that Frances Ashby, widow, was by reason of grief and the weakness of her sex no longer of sound competence to the management of the estate. He read the doctor's line, naming me of unsettled mind. And then he lifted his eyes from the paper, over the top of it, at the tenants and the gentlemen and me, and he said the words I gave you at the start of this, the words that are the whole black heart of it. A widow can't hold land, he said. Grief has unfit her. It is no kindness to let her ruin what better management might save. He said it into a silent room. 20 tenants who had paid their rents into my hand for years, 2 gentlemen who would carry it to every dinner table in the riding, my husband's sister, the old steward, and me, standing at the head of the table in my widow's black, not 3 weeks a widow, named a fool and a madwoman before every soul whose good opinion I had earned across 19 years of never once being unfair to any of them. I have been asked, since, how I did not strike him. I did not strike him because I am not a woman who is undone in public by any man living, and I had already decided, in the half-second after he spoke, that he had just made the worst mistake of his clever life, though he did not know it yet, and I was not going to spoil it by giving them a scene to remember instead of a sentence. The room did not laugh. I will always be grateful to that room. Nobody laughed. Old Hepworth of the Low Farm looked at the floor. Thomas Peel's hand had closed white on the edge of the rent book. Mr. Fenwick had gone stiff, for it is one thing to watch an estate fall and another to watch a woman shamed at her own table. And into that silence I did the only thing I could do that would cost Crane more than shouting ever would. I thanked him. I said, clearly, so the whole room heard it as clearly as they had heard him, that I thanked Mr. Crane for making his position so very plain before so many witnesses, and that I would give it all the attention it deserved. And I turned to Thomas Peel and asked him to carry on with the rents, and I sat down. And after a moment, the old man's voice, rough as gravel, called the next tenant's name, and a man came up and laid down his money, and the day went on, and Crane stood there a moment with his paper in his hand, having fired his great gun, and found the room still standing and the widow still at the head of the table thanking him. He put the paper away and he left. He had wanted to break me before them. He had, instead, given me 24 witnesses to exactly what he had said and how he had said it. He did not understand that yet. He thought he had won the day. He had, in truth, handed me the rope in a full room before gentlemen and gone away pleased. I did not weep that night either. Something had changed in me, and I felt it change, the way you feel a fever break. Up to that day I had been a woman defending herself, afraid, pleading her rights to a man who would not hear them. From that night I was something else. I stopped asking to be believed. I decided instead to prove it, and to prove it in such a manner that no smooth, clever solicitor's word could ever weigh against it again. He had made it public. Very well. I would make the answer public too, in a courtroom, and I would build the answer out of the one thing in the world I understood better than he did. Paper. So the next morning, before the house was awake, I took the lamp down to the estate room. I have told you that already, at the very start. Now I will tell you what I found there. The estate room is a small cold stone room off the back passage, with a slit of a window and shelves to the ceiling, and it holds every record of Thornholt back to before my time. My ledgers, the old leases, the maps, and on the second shelf, the japanned box, black and chipped at the corner, the brass clasp gone dull. I set the lamp down and I lifted it and I opened it, and I did the thing I am ashamed I had never done. I took out the settlement of 1849 and I sat down on the little stool and I read it, every word, in the lamplight for the first time in 19 years. And it was mine. There was no informality in it. There was nothing in it that could not stand at law. It was a plain, sound, careful deed drawn by a good hand and witnessed and sealed, and it vested the land of Thornholt in Frances Ashby, my full and married name, to her sole and separate use, for her life, free of the claim of any heir. Crane had told me to my face that it was informal and could not stand. He had told the whole room I could not hold land, and here, in my own cold hands, in the lamplight, was the paper that said I could, and did, and always had, since before he ever carried a deed in the riding. He had lied to me about a document he thought I would never read. I sat with that a while. It is a strange thing to hold the proof of your own safety and feel, first, not relief, but a cold, slow anger, because you understand at last the shape of what was tried against you. He had counted on my ignorance of my own paper. He had counted on a widow being too grieved and too unlearned to go and read the deed in the box. For 19 years I had proved I was neither, and he had looked straight past 19 years and seen only a woman in black. But I was not finished, and this is the part that turned a defence into a weapon. Crane held the office copies. When a settlement is made, the solicitors keep a copy in their own records, and it was from his office copy that he had claimed to work when he told me the thing was informal. Now an honest copy and an honest original say the same words, so I meant to have his office copy set beside my original in a court to show he had lied about what it said. But I am a keeper of books, and a keeper of books reads more than the words. She reads the hand. I had, some weeks before, when Crane first came, asked him for a sight of his office copy of the settlement, and he had, grudging, left a copy of it with me, thinking, I suppose, that I could make nothing of it. It lay in my desk. So that morning I brought it down to the estate room, and I laid his office copy beside my original, on the steward's slate, in the flat grey light from the slit window, with the lamp close, and I went over them line by line the way I go over two ledgers that will not agree. And they did not agree. Two things, I will tell you both, and then I will stop, for the night is getting on and there is much still to come. The first was the date. On my original, the settlement is dated plainly in the year 1849. On his office copy, the date had been meddled with. If you held it flat to the lamp, you could see it. The paper at the date was thinner, roughed. The surface of it scraped where the old ink had been taken off with a knife or a pumice, and a new figure written over the scrape in ink that sat differently on the worried paper than the ink around it. Someone had scraped away the true date and written another. I could not yet be sure to what purpose, but I knew what a scraped date on a deed means. It means the deed has been made to say a thing it did not say. It means fraud. The second was worse, and it was the hand. Every deed is witnessed. My original carried the signatures of the two men who had witnessed it in 1849, and one of them was a name I knew, for he had been my husband's father's clerk, a man named Sowerby, long dead. On my original, Sowerby's signature was Sowerby's, in Sowerby's own hand, which I had seen 100 times on old leases in that very room. On Crane's office copy, Sowerby's signature was there too. But it was not Sowerby's hand. It was a copy of it. A tracing. A good one, careful, but it had the deadness that a traced hand always has, the little checks and hesitations where a forger lifts his pen to look again at what he copies, that a true, flowing signature never has. I had watched real signatures go onto real paper for 19 years. I know the difference between a man signing his name and a man drawing another man's name. And the Sowerby on Crane's copy had been drawn. Someone had scraped a date and traced a dead man's signature onto an office copy of my marriage settlement. And the only man who held that office copy, the only man who had it in his keeping and could have meddled with it, was Josiah Crane. His whole petition, the paper he had read aloud in a full room, the claim that my land could not stand at law, rested upon a forged instrument in his own hand. I sat very still in that cold room with the lamp burning down, and I understood, at last and completely, what I was holding. Not merely proof that I could keep my house. Proof that the man who had shamed me had committed a crime, a hanging word of a crime in the old days and still a ruinous one, the forging and uttering of a false deed to obtain another person's property. He had not merely wronged me, he had put his own neck, and his own name, and his own livelihood onto the slate between us. And he did not know that I could see it. I said nothing. I want you to understand that most of all. I did not run to Margaret with it, nor to Thomas Peel, nor to a magistrate that morning. I did not copy it out. I did not so much as let my face change when next Crane came smiling to the house. Because I am a keeper of books, and I have learned the one hard patience that keeping books teaches, which is that you do not close an account until every figure is proved, and you do not let the other party see the total before you are ready to render it. He had been loud. He had read me aloud to a room. I would be quiet, quiet as the box on the shelf, until the day the quiet could do what no shouting ever could. I put my original settlement back in the japanned box. I kept his forged copy safe and separate, and I told no living soul yet what I had seen in the lamp. And I sat down that same night at the little desk in the parlour, and I wrote 2 letters, and these were not letters of warning, for the time for warning a man like Crane was over. The first was to a barrister in the county town, a Mr. Aldous Wren, an honest, precise gentleman whose name I had from my own father years before, as a man who could not be bought and did not lie. I asked him, plainly, to undertake a quiet examination of the office copies of a certain settlement against the original, which I held, and I told him what I believed he would find, and I asked him, above all things, to say nothing, to no one, until the quarter sessions. The second was to the Incorporated Law Society, the body that keeps the roll of solicitors, the roll on which the name Josiah Crane was written, and by whose leave alone he was permitted to call himself a solicitor at all. I asked them as well to look. I sealed both letters. I sat a moment with my hand flat upon them in the candlelight, a widow 3 weeks and a little more, in a cold house, with an old steward asleep over the yard, and a frightened sister in a cottage on the edge of the land, and 20 tenants who had watched me shamed, and not one of them laughing. And I was not afraid any longer. That was the thing. The fear had gone out of me in the estate room over 2 papers and a lamp. I had stopped being the woman the solicitor said could not hold land. I had become the person who was going to render his account. I did not yet know how close he would come, before the end, to having me declared mad and silenced before ever I could be heard. I did not know that he would guess something was wrong, and move to have his own petition seated first, to put a keeper over me and make my word worth nothing in any court. That race was still to come, and it would come nearer than I would like to tell you. But that night I only sent the girl to bed, and put the 2 letters where the carrier would take them at first light, and turned down the lamp. And I went up the dark stairs of my own house, past my husband's empty room, thinking of a scraped date, and a dead man's traced name, and a man in a good black coat who did not yet know that the widow had read the fine print after all. The carrier took the 2 letters at first light, as I had meant him to. I watched from the landing window while it was still half dark, the man's lantern swinging at the gate, and I did not go down. It was better that no one saw me care whether they went or stayed. Then I washed my face and pinned my hair and went down to be. For a while yet, the woman Crane believed me to be. That was the hard part, not the reading of the settlement, not the finding of the scraped date. Those had been done in one long night, and a night ends. The hard part was the weeks after, when I had to sit across from the man and let him think he was winning. He came again on the Thursday. He always came on a Thursday, as though grief kept a calendar. I had the girl bring the good tea, the same tea he had drunk while he told me I was not fit to keep my own roof, and I poured it with a steady hand. "Frances," he said. He had taken to my Christian name since the funeral, as if the burying of Edmund had made us intimate. "I hope you have had time to think more kindly of what I proposed." "I have thought of little else," I said, which was true, and let him take it the way he wished. He set down his cup. He had a way of setting down a cup that I had come to hate more than any words he said, a small satisfied click, the sound of a man arranging the world to suit himself. "You are a sensible woman at heart," he said. I always said so. £900, Frances, a clean sum, in your hand, and no ledgers, no tithes, no tenants at the door with their troubles. A cottage in Northallerton, warm, and a girl to do for you. It is what Edmund would have wanted. I looked at my lap. I had learned that if I looked at my lap he read it as surrender, and a man reading surrender talks on, and a man talking on says more than he means to. "You knew what Edmund wanted," I said low, "better than most. He leaned back. He worried for you at the end. He said to me," this was in the autumn, before he took bad, he said, "Crane, she has no head for the business of it. See her write." That was a lie. Edmund had said no such thing, for Edmund had watched me keep the books 19 years and knew my head for the business of it better than he knew his own. But I did not say so. I let the lie sit in the room, and I let my hands tremble a very little on the saucer, and I saw Crane see it, and I saw him pleased. "I cannot think of it yet," I said. "So soon." "You will let me think of it?" Of course. He rose, gathered his good black coat about him, all kindness now that he thought the thing was going his way. "Take your time, Frances, only. Not too long. The county court does not sit forever, and it is easier, far easier, to do this by consent than to have it." Ordered, there it was. The threat in the kind voice. If I would not sign, he would have the court name me unfit and take the choice out of my hands. He said it gently, the way you would warn a child off a hot grate, and he meant it to the marrow. "I understand you," I said. And I did, better than he knew. When he had gone, I stood at the window and watched his gig go down the drive, and I let myself, for one moment, feel the whole size of what he was. Then I put it away and went to find Thomas Peel. Peel was in the estate room at the low desk, going over the Michaelmas rents in his slow, careful hand. He was past 70, and his fingers were knotted with the cold, but he had never yet made an error I could find, and I had looked. He glanced up at me over his spectacles. "He's been," Peel said. It was not a question. "He has, and you sat and let him." I sat and let him. Peel set down his pen. He had served Edmund's father before Edmund, and Edmund after, and he did not like what he had watched these 3 weeks and more. "Missus," he said, "there's talk in the yard. Hepworth at the Low Farm says Crane's man told him the estate's as good as sold, and to look to his lease. They're frightened. 20 families, and they're frightened. I know it. Then let me tell them. Tell them nothing." I said it harder than I meant, and softened. "Thomas, trust me a fortnight, only that. If I am right, a fortnight will do it, and if I tell them now, and Crane hears it, and he will hear it, the yard leaks like a sieve, Then he moves faster than I can. Let him think me beaten. It is the only ground I have." The old man studied me a long while. Then he did a thing he had never done in 19 years. He stood, stiff at the knee, and he took off his spectacles, and he inclined his head to me, a small grave bow, the kind a man gives to the master of a house. "Aye, missus," he said. "A fortnight." And then he gave me the second gift, though neither of us yet knew all it was worth. He drew from the press an old bundle of leases from the 40s, Edmund's father's time, and he laid one before me. "You'll want this, maybe." Sowerby drew these. Old Sowerby, the clerk, that witnessed half the papers in this house before he died. That's his true hand, missus, every letter of it. If you're minded to know a true Sowerby from a false one. I looked at the leases. There was the signature, the real one, in the ink of 20 years gone, the loops of it, the mean little crossing of the T, the way the man had run his E's together as though he grudged the paper. And I thought of the signature on Crane's office copy, the careful, dead, drawn thing, a man's name copied by an eye that had never seen the hand move, and I understood that Thomas Peel had just handed me the difference between a lawsuit and a hanging matter. "Keep these safe," I said, "in the box with the other. Say nothing. Nothing," he said. Wren's answer came on the second Tuesday. It came inside a wrapper addressed in a woman's hand, my late cousin's daughter in York, which I had asked him to use, for I did not trust that Crane, who took in the district's post at his own office as a courtesy to the parish, would not hold a letter with a barrister's frank and open it over a kettle. I had grown careful. Grief teaches nothing. Fear teaches a great deal. Mr. Aldous Wren wrote a plain hand and a plain sense. He had, he said, examined nothing yet, for I had sent him nothing but my account. But my account, if it were true, described an instrument that no court in England would let stand, and a second instrument that no court in England would let its maker walk free of. He would come to Thornholt, quietly, on a day I named, in the character of a land valuer which would draw no eye, gentlemen valuers being thick as crows about an estate where a death has been. He asked me to have ready the original settlement, Crane's office copy if I could come by it honestly, and any true sample of the dead witness's hand. He asked me to say nothing to any soul. I burned the letter in the estate room grate and watched it go to black lace, and thought, there are still honest men. It is only that you must send a long way for them, sometimes, and pay the carriage. The near thing came the following week. Crane's clerk, a narrow young man named Sad, came out to Thornholt on the Thursday in his master's place, Crane being kept in Northallerton by the assizes. He came to press me again, more baldly than Crane would have dared, and to carry back my answer. And while I was out of the room a bare 2 minutes, called by the girl to a matter at the dairy, he did what a clerk of that stamp does. He went through the papers on my writing desk. I know he did, because when I came back the blotter was square to the desk edge and I never leave it square, and because the corner of Wren's second note, which I had been a fool to leave folded under the standish, was showing a half-inch further than I had left it. My heart went over like a cart in a ditch. I stood in the doorway, and I made my face nothing, and I said, "You will take some tea before your ride, Mr. Sad," in a voice from very far off. He looked up at me, and I saw him deciding what he had seen. The note was folded, the direction was outward, in the woman's York hand, my cousin's girl, no barrister's name on the face of it. He had seen a folded paper in a widow's untidy desk. He had not, I prayed to God, had the time to open it. "Thank you. No," he said, and his eyes went to the desk and back to me. Once, quick, "I'm expected. Then I will not keep you." And I saw him out myself, and I stood on the step until his horse was gone past the lodge, and then I went back in and sat down on the estate-room floor with my skirts anyhow around me, like a girl, and shook. It had come that close. Half a minute more at the dairy, one more turn of that boy's curiosity, and Crane would have known by nightfall that the widow had a lawyer, and the whole thing would have gone forward, in the open, on his ground, at his pace, and I would have lost. But he did not open it. Or he opened it and read nothing but a cousin's chatter that I had wrapped the true page inside. For I had done that much, even careless as I was, I had wrapped Wren's note in 3 lines of family nothing before I folded it away. Grief teaches nothing. Fear teaches a great deal. After that I kept every dangerous paper in the japanned box, and the box behind the loose stone in the estate room chimney that Edmund's grandfather had cut for his own secrets, and I trusted the desk with nothing but bills. Wren came the last week of the month. He was a spare, dry man of 50 or so, with a valuer's slow eye and a barrister's quick one behind it. And he walked my fields for the look of the thing, and Hepworth showed him the drainage on the low farm and thought him only what he seemed. And in the evening, with the curtains drawn and Thomas Peel at the door, I laid it all before him on the estate-room table. I laid out the settlement of 1849 first. He read it through twice, slow, his lips moving a little at the operative words. When he came to the clause that vested Thornholt in me, to my sole and separate use, for the term of my natural life, free of the debts or engagements of any husband, and free of any claim of heir or reversioner, he stopped and read it a 3rd time and looked up at me over the paper. "Mrs. Ashby," he said, "do you understand what you have here?" "I have come to," I said. "This is not informal. This is about as formal an instrument as I have seen come out of a country office. It was drawn by a man who knew his business and meant it to hold against exactly the sort of assault that is now being made on it. Whoever told you this could not stand at law told you a falsehood so plain that he must have known it for one. He set it down. Now show me the copy." I gave him Crane's office copy, for I had come by it honestly, or honestly enough, Crane himself had left it with me at the 2nd visit, to frighten me, the altered thing, never dreaming I owned the true one to set beside it. Wren held the two together to the lamp. He was quiet a long time. "Here," he said at last, and turned the copy so I could see, though I had seen it a dozen nights over. The date. "You see the ground of the paper, here, how it is roughed. A knife has been over it. The figures have been lifted and others set down. And here, his dry finger moved to the foot of the page, the attesting signature. Sowerby," he looked at me. "You have a true sample?" I laid Peel's old lease beside it. The living hand and the dead drawn one, the 2 Sowerbys, side by side under the lamp. Wren looked from one to the other for the space of a slow minute, and then this dry, careful man let out a breath, and sat back and said a thing I did not expect. He said, "Good God." "Yes," I said. "Mrs. Ashby, this 2nd signature was never made by the man who made the first. This was drawn. You can see where the pen stopped, here and here, to look at the pattern it was copying. A living signature does not stop. It runs. A man's name is the one thing his hand does without thinking. This one thinks at every letter. He set it down as though it had grown hot. Do you know what you are holding? I have thought, I said, that I am holding a crime. You are holding 2. He counted them off on his dry fingers, a barrister to the bone even in astonishment. The date is altered to make the settlement fall after some later deed he means to set up, so that your interest seems overreached. That is a forgery. And to prop the altered instrument, he has forged the attestation of a dead man, so that no living witness can deny it. That is a second forgery, and a bolder one. Either alone, uttered, that is, produced, used, laid before a court as genuine, either alone is a felony, Mrs. Ashby, not a matter for the equity side, for money and land, though it is that too. A matter for the criminal court. And he paused, and I saw him arrive at the thing the title of my whole trouble had promised from the first. A matter, most certainly, for the Incorporated Law Society, and the roll on which this man's name is written. A solicitor who utters a forged instrument to strip his own client's widow does not remain a solicitor. He cannot. The profession will not have him once it is shown. And there it was, spoken by an honest man in my own estate room, with my dead witness's true hand under the lamp. Not my hope. My finding. Confirmed, I had kept the ledgers 19 years, and I had brought them down too, all of them, the long row of them, in my own upright copying hand, tithe and rent and repair and wage, 19 years of a house kept true. And Wren turned some pages of those as well, not because he needed them for the law, but because, I think, he wished to see the woman the petition called unfit. He turned a few years of my figures. He closed the book gently. They said your mind was unsettled, he said. Since my bereavement, I said. Doctor, Nangle's phrase. It is in Crane's leather case, in a physician's letter, for a fee I could name to the shilling. Mrs. Ashby, said Aldous Wren, in 19 years I have not seen a set of estate books kept to this hand. There is not a magistrate in the riding who will look at these and at that physician's line and believe the same woman answers to both. He gathered his papers into a neat stack, squared them, the way Peel squared a blotter, the way careful men handle the thing that matters. Say nothing still. Sit compliant a little longer. Let me lay the ground. When the quarter sessions sit, I will be ready, and so will the Law Society, whom I shall now write to in earnest, with my own name to it, which carries a weight your letter, forgive me, could not. And we will have him in the one place he cannot bully, the open court, before the same eyes that heard him shame you. He will not wait quiet, I said. He is not a patient man. He feels the delay already. No, Wren agreed, and for the first time he looked grave rather than dry. No, he will not. And that is our one danger. If he grows uneasy, he has a move, and it is a wicked one. He can press his own petition, the incompetence to be heard first. If he can get you named of unsound mind before you are heard on the forgery, then the court appoints a keeper over you, a committee of your person and estate, and from that hour your word is worth nothing. A person found unfit cannot prosecute, cannot swear, cannot be believed. He would silence you not by disproving you, but by disqualifying you. He looked at me steadily. It becomes a race, Mrs. Ashby, your motion to be heard against his motion, to seal your mouth. We must be first. I did not sleep much, the nights after that. I had thought the finding was the hard thing. The finding was the easy thing. The waiting to see which paper reached the bench first, that was the rack. And Crane, God rot his instinct, felt the ground shift under him within the week. I think it was sad. I think the clerk went back and said, "She is too quiet. She sits too still." There was a paper in a York hand I did not like. I think a guilty man reads another's stillness as his own guilt read back to him. Whatever it was, Crane moved. Peel brought me the word from Northallerton on a market Friday. Crane had entered his petition at the county court to have the question of my competence heard at the coming sessions, heard first, before any other matter touching Thornholt. He had a physician. He had the sister's fright, if not yet her name. He meant to have me stoppered before I could speak. "He's set the day against you, Mrs." Peel said, twisting his old hat. "Same sessions. Same room. He'll have you named a madwoman by noon and take the land by supper, and there'll be none can gainsay it, for none can gainsay he could not finish it." "Get the trap," I said. "I am going to see Margaret. Margaret Verrell, Edmund's sister, lived in the cottage on the edge of the land with her £60 a year and her widow's caution, and she had let Crane frighten her onto his side with a word about her annuity, that it hung on the estate, and the estate hung on being sensible. I had not blamed her. A frightened woman with £60 and no more is easily steered. But I needed her now, and more than needing her I found, sitting in her small cold parlour, that I wanted her not to be lost. "Margaret," I said, "I am going to tell you a thing, and then you may choose your side, with the whole of it in front of you, which you have never yet had. And I told her. The settlement, sound and mine. The scraped date, the dead man's drawn name, the physician's fee. I told it plain, no colour on it, and I watched her face go from the shut, frightened thing it had been these weeks to something opening and horrified. He said, she began, and stopped. He said Edmund wished it. He said, Edmund told him, see her right, she has no head. Edmund never said it. You knew Edmund. Did he think I had no head? No, Margaret whispered. No, he used to say, Frances keeps this house, I only own it. Her hands were at her mouth. Frances, I stood in the doorway at Michaelmas. I heard him read it out. I heard him call you, and I said nothing. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I said nothing, because he told me my £60, your £60 is safe, I said. It is charged on the estate under the same settlement that is mine, and while Thornholt stands and I stand it is paid, and I will put it in writing over my own name this hour if you ask it. It was never Crane's to threaten. That was the last of his lies to you. She wept then, a little, and I let her, and when she was done she wiped her face and sat up, and she was Edmund's sister again. The girl I had known before, fear got into her. Tell me what to do, she said. Come to the sessions, I said, and when you are asked, tell what you heard him read, and in what voice, before whom. That is all. Tell the truth in a room. It is the one thing he never thought any of us would dare. The tenants came the same way, once Peel let it be known, quietly, one at a time, in barns and at back doors, that the missus was not beaten and there was law on her side after all. 24 of them, in the end, would stand and say they had heard Josiah Crane read a paper aloud at the Michaelmas quarter day that named Frances Ashby unfit and grief-broken, before Mr. Fenwick of Barforth and Sir Harry Loft and the whole assembled rent, 24 witnesses to the shaming he had meant for a weapon. He had counted his witnesses that day to wound me deepest. He had not thought to be told that a thing done before 24 people can be proven by 24 people. Wren was first to the bench. That was the whole of it, in the end, and it came down to a clerk's diligence and a barrister who did not dawdle. Wren's motion that the question of the settlement and the office copy be examined before any question of competence, since the competence petition rested wholly on documents whose very genuineness was in dispute, Wren's motion was entered and argued in chambers and granted 2 days before the sessions sat. The court would look at the papers first. If the papers were false, there was no ground under the petition, and the petition would fall of itself. Crane had raced to seal my mouth, and the law had put its hand up and said, "First let us see whether this man has any right to be heard at all." He did not know it was lost even then. That is the part I turn over still. He came into the sessions room in his good black coat, with his leather case under his arm, and he nodded to Fenwick and to Sir Harry as to men who would soon be his neighbours in fact as well as in name, and he had no more idea of the drop beneath his feet than a man on a scaffold with the bag not yet drawn. The room was the same room, near enough, as had been full at Michaelmas, oak bench, green baize on the magistrate's table, the high cold windows, and along the walls the tenants of Thornholt in their market clothes, and the 2 gentlemen, and Margaret, and old Thomas Peel, straight as a post for all his 70 years. And I sat where Wren had set me, in the second row, in my black, my gloved hands folded in my lap, and I did not weep, and I did not tremble, and I looked at Josiah Crane, and I waited. Wren rose. He laid on the green baize the settlement of 1849, and beside it Crane's office copy, and beside that the old Low Farm lease in Sowerby's living hand. He spoke plainly, no thunder in him, a valuer's slow voice turned to the law. He showed the magistrate the vesting clause, my sole and separate use, and let him read it. He showed the magistrate the roughed ground where the date had been lifted, and put a glass over it, and let him look. And then he brought forward the examiner the Incorporated Law Society had sent, a grey exact man who had come up from London with the office rolls, and who had examined Crane's own files under the Society's warrant, and who now testified, on his oath, to a room gone very still, that the attesting signature on the office copy in Josiah Crane's keeping was not the signature of the late clerk Sowerby, nor made by any hand but one that had copied Sowerby's before it, and that the alteration of the date and the forging of the attestation had, in his professional judgment, been done together and with intent, and were, he said, and he said the word to the whole room, a forgery. The word went round the walls like cold water. I watched Crane's face while it went. I had waited 3 weeks and a little more, and then a good deal longer, to watch his face while that word crossed the room, and I will not pretend I took no satisfaction in it. He had drunk my tea and told me a widow could not hold land. I watched him understand that the ground was gone. He rose. Of course he rose. A man like that does not fall in silence. He blusters going down. It is the only way he knows to occupy a room. He said the examiner was mistaken. He said the society had sent a jealous rival to ruin an honest country practitioner. He said the widow, and he turned, and he pointed at me, the same finger, the same coat. The widow was, as was well known, of unsettled mind since her bereavement, that there was a physician's letter to prove it, that this whole fantastical charge was the very proof of her unsound fancy, and that no widow's word, got up by a hungry barrister, could be set against the sworn account of a solicitor of 19 years standing in the county. No widow's word, he said, loud, to the bench, stands against a solicitor. And the room looked at me. The magistrate looked at me. And Wren, who had told me there might come a moment when I should be asked to speak, and that I should speak once and briefly, and then be still, Wren looked at me and gave the smallest nod. I stood. I was not asked to. I stood, and the room let me, because there are moments a room grants a widow that it grants no one else, and I had earned this one. I did not raise my voice. I have never in my life had a loud voice, and I did not find one that day. I spoke quietly, so that they had to be still to hear me, which is its own kind of loud. "Mr. Crane," I said, "3 weeks after I buried my husband, you sat in my morning room and drank my tea, and you told me a widow can't hold land. I let it sit. You said it before witnesses, and you did not lower your voice, and you were pleased to be heard. So I will answer you now, before witnesses, and I will not lower mine." I looked at him, only at him. A widow can't hold land, yet it seems a solicitor can lose his. And then I sat down and folded my hands and was still, as Wren had asked. The room did not cheer. It was not that kind of room, and they were not that kind of people, and I was glad of it. But I heard the breath go out of 24 tenants at once, a long low sound like wind finding a gap, and I heard Sir Harry Loft say, half under his breath, "Well said." By God, and I saw the magistrate put his hand over his mouth for a moment before he could go on, and it was not to hide a smile of pleasure, but something graver. An old man's shame, I think, at what had nearly been done in his court to a woman in her black. He did not smile when he spoke. He looked at Crane a long time, and when he spoke his voice was the coldest thing in that cold room. "Mr. Crane," he said, "this court has before it a forged instrument, sworn to as forged, found in your own custody, produced by you and used by you to move for the guardianship of a woman whose books, I am told, and whose bearing I have now seen. Give not the smallest colour to your petition. I will not hear the competence matter. There is no competence matter. It is dismissed, and it should never have been brought." He drew a paper toward him. "I refer the question of your conduct and of these instruments to the Incorporated Law Society, whose examiner sits here and needs no direction from me as to what he has found, and I bind you over this day to answer at the assize for the uttering of a forged deed. You will not leave this town tonight a solicitor, sir. I doubt you leave it one much longer at all. Crane did not collapse in any large way. That is not how such men fall. He simply stopped. The colour went out of him, and the bluster went out of him, and he stood there in his good black coat, holding his leather case, the physician's letter useless inside it. His purchase money useless in whatever account he had readied it in. His name? The name on the roll. The thing that had let him call himself a solicitor and sit in widows' mourning rooms and drink their tea and tell them lies. That name already, in the room's mind and soon in the society's book, struck through. He looked once at Fenwick and Sir Harry, the neighbours he had meant to join, and they looked at the wall over his head, and that, I think, was the true fall, more than the magistrate's words. Not the law taking his profession. The two gentlemen not meeting his eye. Margaret stood, unbidden as I had, and said in a shaking voice that carried that she was Edmund Ashby's sister, and that she had heard Mr. Crane read the shaming paper at Michaelmas, and that she was ashamed to have sat silent, and would sit silent no longer. And Dr. Nangle's letter, when the society came to it, was withdrawn by the man himself in a great hurry of fright, and cost him more, I heard, in the end, than the fee had ever been worth. But those were small falls after the great one. The room had already turned. It only remained for those who had leaned to Crane to lean, publicly, away. I did not speak to him. There was nothing to say that I had not said standing in my black, with my hands folded. He was taken out by the side door in the character of a man bound over, which is a very different character from the one he had walked in wearing, and I did not watch him go. I had watched Edmund's gig too many times going down our drive to spend my eyes on Josiah Crane. That night I went down to the estate room alone, with the lamp. As I had gone the night, everything turned. I took the japanned box from behind the loose stone, the black lacquer chipped at the one corner, the brass clasp gone dull, and I set it on the table and opened it, and took out the settlement of 1849, and read once more the clause that made Thornholt mine to my sole and separate use for the term of my natural life. The lamp hissed. The house was quiet over me, and I sat with the paper my husband and his father had drawn to keep me safe. The paper I had never once thought about in 19 years, because I had never needed to, and I thought of how near it had come to being nothing, a scraped date and a dead man's traced name away from being nothing, and I put my face in my hands, at last, alone, where no one could read it, and I let the 3 weeks and all that came after go out of me in the dark. Then I dried my face, and squared the ledgers on the desk, and put the box back, but not behind the stone. I had done with hiding it. It is a year now, near enough. Spring at Thornholt, the orchard in its white, the becks loud with the thaw. The rent books are square in my hand and the tithes paid to the day, and the 20 families on the land sleep sound in their leases. The japanned box sits open on the parlour shelf, in the light, where a caller may see it, and does. The tenants' children go through the orchard after the wind falls, and I let them, and Thomas Peel, who will not retire though I have begged him, still finds no error in my figures. Though he looks, God love him, he still looks. Margaret takes her tea with me on Thursdays now. We do not speak of the man. Her £60 is paid the first of each quarter, over my name, as I promised in her cold parlour, and she has never once had to ask. Of Josiah Crane I know only what comes down the county on market talk. He was struck from the rolls before the summer was out, and answered at the assize, and got off the gaol, I am told, by his years and by making what they call restitution, which is to say he gave back money he had never yet managed to take. He is not a solicitor, he will never be one again. I am told he clerks now for another man, in another county, at a copying desk, writing out in a fair hand the deeds and the letters that other men will sign, copying, all his days. The good hands he may no longer put his own name beneath. I did not arrange that. I find I do not need to have arranged it. There is a justice in a man's punishment fitting the exact shape of his crime, and I am content to have been only the hand that carried the paper to the bench. He wrote to me, in the winter. One letter, in that fair copying hand of his, humble now, asking, you will not credit it, but I have the letter still, in the box, asking whether I would furnish him a character, a line as to his honesty, that he might better his place with the man he clerks for. A reference. From me. I answered him. I am not a hard woman, whatever he told that room, and I thought a long while over what was owing, from me to him at the end of it all, and then I wrote him a single line, and signed it in my own hand, the upright copying hand that kept a house true for 19 years and read the fine print when it had to. I find, I wrote, that I cannot in conscience vouch for a hand I have seen forge another man's name, and I sealed it and sent it by the carrier and went back to my books. The fine print keeps those who read it. My husband's father knew it, drawing that settlement in the spring of 1849, and my husband knew it, and I have learned it, late and hard, in a cold house in my black. Read the quiet paper, know the hands you deal with, and when a man in a good coat tells you what you cannot do, thank him, and go down to the estate room, and take up the lamp. If you have watched this far, comment the town you're watching from. I should like to know how far Frances Ashby has travelled tonight.